Hi YouTubians, back again with another essay this time by one Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now before I get into it, I'd just like to give you a little background. And here Dr. King references Robert Williams. Robert Williams was a diehard advocate of militant black self-defense. He was the local president of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in Monroe County, North Carolina, and an ex-Marine. He formed, drilled, and armed blacks to defend themselves. Both the NAACP and Southern Christian Leadership Conference strongly denounced Williams' endorsement of violence, but the events were beyond anyone's control. Alright, so what I'm going to read by Dr. King is his essay entitled The Social Organization of Nonviolence. It was printed in Liberation, October 1959, on pages 5 through 6. Paradoxically, the struggle for civil rights has reached a stage of profound crisis. Although its outward aspect is distinctively less turbulent, and victories of token integration have been won in the hard resistance areas of Virginia and Arkansas. The crisis has its origin in a decision rendered by the Supreme Court more than a year ago, which upheld the principal placement law. Though little known as then, this decision fundamentally weakened the historic 1954 ruling of the court. It is imperceptibly becoming the basis of a de facto compromise between the powerful contending forces. The 1954 decision required for effective implementation resolute federal action supported by mass action to undergird all necessary changes. It is obvious that federal action by the legislature and executive branches was half-hearted and inadequate. The activity of Negro forces, while heroic in some instances and impressive in the other sporadic situations, lacked consistency and militancy sufficient to fill the void left by government default. The segregationists were swift to seize these advantages, and unrestrained by moral or social conscience, defied the law boldly and brazenly. The net effect of this social equation has led to the present situation, which is without clear-cut victory for either side. Token integration is a developing pattern. This type of integration is merely an affirmation of a principle without the substance of change. It is, like the Supreme Court decision, a pronouncement of justice, but by itself does not ensure that millions of Negro children will be educated in conditions of equality. This is not to say that it is without value. It has substantial importance. However, it fundamentally changes the outlook of the whole movement, for it raises the prospect of long, slow change without a perceptible end. As we have seen in northern cities, token integration has become a pattern in many communities and remained frozen, even though environmental attitudes are substantially less hostile to full integration than in the South. This, then, is the danger. Full integration can easily become a distant or mythical goal. Major integration may be long postponed, and in the quest for social calm, a compromise firmly implanted in which the real goals are merely token integration for a long period to come. The Negro was the tragic victim of another compromise in 1878, when his full equality was bargained away by the federal government, and a condition somewhat above slave status, but short of genuine citizenship, became his social and political existence for nearly a century. There is reason to believe that the Negro of 1959 will not accept supinely any such compromises in the contemporary struggle for integration. His struggle will continue, but the obstacles will determine its specific nature. It is axiomatic in the social life that the imposition of frustrations leads to two kinds of reactions. One is the development of a wholesale social organization to resist with effective, firm measure any efforts to impede its progress. The other is a confused, anger-motivated drive to strike back violently and to inflict damage. Primarily, it seeks to cause injury to retaliate for wrongful suffering. Secondarily, it seeks real progress. It is punitive, not radical or constructive. The current calls for violence have their roots in this latter tendency. Here one must be clear that there are three different views on the subject of violence. One is the approach of pure nonviolence, which cannot readily or easily attract large masses, for it requires extraordinary discipline and courage. The second is violence exercised in self-defense, which all societies, from the most primitive to the most cultured and advanced, accept as moral and legal. The principle of self-defense, even involving weapons and bloodshed, has never been condemned, even by Gandhi, who sanctioned it for those unable to master pure nonviolence. The third is the advocacy of violence as a tool of advancement, organized as in warfare deliberately and consciously. To this tendency, many Negroes are being tempted today. There are incalculable perils in this approach. It is not the danger or sacrifice of physical being which is primary, though it cannot be contemplated without a sense of deep concern for human life. The greatest danger is that it will fail to attract Negroes to a real collective struggle and will confuse the large uncommitted middle group, which as yet has not supported either side. Further, it will mislead Negroes into the belief that there is the only path and place them as a minority in a position where they confront a far larger adversary than it is possible to defeat in this form of combat. When the Negro uses force in self-defense, he does not forfeit support. He may even win it by the courage and self-respect it reflects. When he seeks to initiate violence, he provokes questions about the necessity for it and inevitably is blamed for its consequences. It is unfortunately true that however the Negro acts, his struggle will not be free of violence initiated by his enemies, and he will need ample courage and willingness to sacrifice to defeat this manifestation of violence. But if he seeks it and organizes it, he cannot win. Does this leave the Negro without a positive method to advance? Mr. Robert Williams would have us believe that there is no effective and political alternative. He argues that we must be cringing and submissive or take up arms. To so place the issue distorts the whole problem. There are other meaningful alternatives. The Negro people can organize socially to initiate many forms of struggle which they can drive their enemy back without resort to futile and harmful violence. In the history of the movement for racial advancement, many creative forms have been developed. The mass boycott, sit-down protests and strikes, sit-ins, refusal to pay fines and bail for unjust arrests, mass marches, mass meetings, prayer pilgrimage, etc. Indeed, in Mr. Williams' own county of Monroe, North Carolina, a striking example of collective community action won a significant victory without the use of arms or threats of violence. When the police incarcerated a Negro doctor unjustly, the aroused people of Monroe marched to the police station, crowded into its halls and corridors, and refused to leave until their colleague was released. Unable to arrest everyone, the authorities released the doctor and neither side attempted to unleash violence. This experience was related by the doctor who was the intended victim. There is more power in socially organized masses on the march than there is in the guns of a few desperate men. Our enemies would prefer to deal with a small group rather than with a huge, unarmed, but resolute mass of people. However, it is necessary that the mass action method be persistent and unyielding. Gandhi said the Indian people must never let them rest, referring to the British. He urged them to keep protesting daily and weekly in a variety of ways. This method inspired and organized the Indian masses and disorganized and demobilized the British. It educates its myriad participants socially and morally. All history teaches us that like a turbulent ocean beating great cliffs into fragments of rock, the determined movement of people increasingly demanding their rights always disintegrates the old order. It is this form of struggle, non-cooperation with evil through mass actions, never letting them rest, which offers the more effective road for those who have been tempted and goaded to violence. It needs the bold and brave because it is not free of danger. It faces the vicious and evil enemy squarely. It requires dedicated people because it is a backbreaking task to arouse, to organize, and to educate tens of thousands of disciplined, sustained action. From this form of struggle, more emerges that is permanent and damaging to the enemy than from a few acts of organized violence. Our present urgent necessity is to cease our internal fighting and turn outward to the enemy, using every form of mass action yet known, create new forms, and resolve never to let them rest. This is the social lever which will force open the door of freedom. Our powerful weapons are the voices, the feet, and the bodies of dedicated, united people moving without rest towards a just goal. Greater tyrants and southern segregationists have been subdued and defeated by this form of struggle. We have not yet used it, and it would be tragic if we spurn it because we fail to perceive its dramatic strength and power. I am reluctant to interject a personal defense against charges by Mr. Williams that I am inconsistent in my struggle against war and too weak-kneed to protest nuclear war. Merely to set the record straight, may I state that repeatedly, in public addresses and in my writings, I have unequivocally declared my hatred for those most colossal of all evils, and I have condemned any organizer of war, regardless of his rank or nationality. I have signed numerous statements with other Americans condemning nuclear testing, and have authorized publication of my name and advertisements appearing in the largest circulation newspapers in the countries without concern that it was unpopular to speak out.